All right, okay, let's look at this session. I will do the session that I've missed out and add it to, so you can listen back. I was going to talk about benches of 3, benches of 7, and that's the government of foundation, and we've talked about it quite a bit in different bits, so you picked up a little bit about it. I'll do the sessions and add it so you can listen to it later, but I want to talk in this session about laws and legislation. So if we're going to arise and be seated, what do we do when we're seated, and how do we effectively use the authority we have in a way which is going to enable us to use that authority to change things on the earth? So if the kingdom is going to come and it's God's government, then how does government in heaven work? What happens there? Because we're going to be involved in what happens there. So we need to understand a little bit of how it functions and what happens. So everything functions according to the precepts, statutes, laws, and ordinances of God. They are, when the 3 things are in authority, precepts, statutes, laws, then it opens the ordinances of God to be outworked on earth. And all of that is relational and based in love. So heaven's government is a government of love. If you get that, that will change everything, because then whatever you do will come out of love. So what are laws and legislation? Because it's not something usually you talk a lot about in normal church. Now, the only laws you'll really talk about are the laws of the 10 Commandments, the Old Testament law, or you may actually talk about the sort of things which are acceptable and not acceptable in that group. And they are unwritten laws that if you step outside of, you will be treated with suspicion, or as a rebel, or you'll be stigmatized. And there's various things within organizations, groups, churches that are unspoken laws. It's like, this is behavior that you're expected to actually agree with, line up with, and according to. Now, real laws and real legislation is about things that permission us, give us empowerment to do something. So how do we get laws and legislation? Because we can be given them, but we can also make them, depending on where you're operating and whatever season you're in. Oops. So where do we get that legislation? Generally in the courts of heaven. Where do we legislate from? Because you have this legislation. What do you do with it? How do you use the laws and legislation in heaven, and how do you use them on earth? Because sometimes it's a lot of things, people think everything's automatic. You do a court case and everything's wonderful. No, a court case gives you a verdict, which is a piece of legislation, which you then have to use. And if you don't use it, essentially, there's no point having it. Because the verdict says you can be free, but if you don't apply the verdict, you just live not free. So often when you get a verdict from the court to give you a freedom, you have to apply it to the behavioral pathways, which are memories within your mind and the neural pathways. Because if something triggers your behavior, you'll find yourself already spiraled down in behavior, because that's the normal behavior that happens when something triggers you. Let's say you're dealing with rejection, you have a verdict that you are accepted and you do not need to feel rejection, and someone rejects you. So all of a sudden, you're behaving out of rejection when you don't need to, but you've not applied the verdict. Why? Because your memory triggers the rejection to take you down a pathway. Now you need to replace the lie of what it feels to be rejected with the truth of what it is to be accepted. And you have to break the neural pathway that leads you to the memories of rejection and replace that with a new neural pathway that leads you to the truth of acceptance. So when something triggers rejection, all it does is take you down to, I'm accepted. So what does it matter if you reject me? God accepts me. So, I'm in a position where I share a lot of things with a lot of people, and not everyone likes what I share. So I could be offended by those who call me this or call me that or call me the other. But I'm like, I just bless them. because it makes no difference to how I feel about myself, because I know I'm accepted by God. So if God is for me, who cares who's against me, is my attitude, because I apply the truth of the reality. Now, most people don't. They get a verdict from a court case and they think that's it. Wonderful, I should be free. And then something comes as a thought in their mind, and it's like, well, I shouldn't have those thoughts. Well, thoughts are not the same as responding to the thought. So you can't stop thoughts. I think there's a quote that says, you can't stop a bird flying around you, but you can stop it nesting in your hair. You know, you don't have to give it room. So that's why we have to take captive every thought. Does this court line up with the truth of this verdict? No. Well, I'm not receiving it then. But it makes me feel, okay, well, I'll deal with why it feels that way and then apply the truth. This is what lie busting does. It replaces the lie with the truth. And then when you hear the lie, you no longer believe it because it's not true. So a verdict will give you the same authority, but you have to apply it. So we need to legislate and apply it in our lives on a daily basis and live from the empowerment that it gives you. Who helps us legislate? We can get help. We don't have to learn how to do all this stuff on our own. So Zechariah 3:7 is this whole process of growing in maturity so we can govern and rule the house. To rule the house, you need laws and legislation. We would not cope in this country if it was a free-for-all and anarchy. Heaven is not anarchy. There's government there. There is law there. But the law is what enables you to govern and rule because it's authoritative and legislative. So one of the things it says there is we will have charge of the courts. What courts? Because it's all very well saying we'll have charge of the courts, plural, not singular. What ones are we supposed to do and what are we supposed to do there? That's all part of understanding. In our system of government and in our legal system in the UK, we have lots of different courts. We have family court, which deal with family sorts of issues that bring mediation into family. We have our magistrates court locally. They can only enforce a certain type of sentence. You have Crown Court, which is local, usually in Exeter, but you can have local Crown Court, which is usually with a judge and not a magistrate, and usually a jury. And then you have a next level of court and a next level of court, and eventually you'll get up to Supreme Court or the Court of Appeal Court, or for us, the House of Lords, which is the ultimate court in the land, ultimately. So in heaven, there's all sorts of different courts as well. So legislation is the process of making or enacting laws. It's not a difficult thing, but it's not something you're usually taught to do. What is it to legislate? To use the authority a law provides to provide, create, and prepare or rule. Do you use it? You know, there are some rules and laws that are still in our statutes in the UK, which are now totally nonsensical. Like you can't drive a herd of geese up a road. Well, it doesn't happen very often today, but actually there are bylaws within lots of things. But bylaws can be added. You know, they added a bylaw in town that you couldn't walk around with open cans of drink because they were having a problem with alcohol in the town. So they set a bylaw. Now the police can say you can't do that. We can confiscate your alcohol. So that was a law which solved a problem that was faced. So that was a you can't do this law. Mostly the laws of heaven are you can. So what authority do we have and over what? Because if you have a law, what are you doing with it and over what can you do it with? The laws of heaven are really designed for us to bless, to bring God's blessing into things, not to bring cursing. God has no curses to bring on anybody. So it's a positive process. Don't think 10 commandments, thou shalt not, because then you'll think law is negative rather than positive. Most of the laws that we have are permissions to enable things to happen. We do have some that says you can't do this, like you can't murder, you can't steal, you can't do certain things, which are all there to safeguard everyone. They're not there to limit people's freedom. They're to help people use their freedom wisely and for everyone's good rather than just their own. So to legislate, you need a sphere of authority, your area of jurisdiction. I know that I have authority in my own life, and I have authority in each of the 7 or more spheres that I have within my own life. I can use that authority. I have authority within the boundaries of other areas that I have been given responsibility for, like my family and other things. I can't have authority outside of the area that I have unless God gives me a mandate. God has given me a mandate into a particular nation at certain times to do certain things, and I can do them. But then when that mandate's ended, I can't go on doing it because it's not my area of jurisdiction. The mandate was for a particular thing in a particular time. So all of us have spheres of authority. You need a mandate to operate in them. See, just because I have a mandate for my family doesn't mean that I can do everything in my family. I need to make sure what I'm doing is in alignment with the Father's heart for my family and what he's doing in my family. So it's important just to know, to legislate the mandate, you need a blueprint and a strategy. That's why God says you can establish an ecclesia. You need the blueprint that says what this ecclesia looks like, and you need legislation that says this is authorized for an ecclesia in Toronto, or an ecclesia in Sydney, or an ecclesia in London, or an ecclesia in Barnstable. It says where you can do that. And sometimes it says you can establish an ecclesia in Barnstable, which will actually become an ecclesia that will gather the whole of North Devon. That's okay, because your jurisdiction is shown and you use it. So a law gives you the specific authorizations needed to manifest that blueprint. And if you don't have those laws, you'll find you'll struggle to establish the government foundationally, because they're based on the permissions that God gives you. So the basis of all laws and legislation is love. If you get that, it will stop you getting into these negative things of being negative towards people and other things. The love is the precepts of God. It's his very nature and character. The statutes of God are how he sees things, how they're ordered. So when we're beginning to legislate, we need to see through his governmental perspective, which is why we need the lion, ox, eagle, man. The 4 faces of God governmentally. And when we stand in there, we can start to see from that perspective. So I'm looking here and I'm looking around, and there's all sorts of things. I stand there and I see through the eyes of the lion, and I see a lack of government here. I see a lack of government over there. I see a lack of government here. So what am I supposed to do about that? I need, therefore, something to deal with that lack of government. So then I engage with the ox, and the ox gives me the eternal word of God, which is his desire for government in this area. So now I have something to base what I can do about that lack of government. Because I can't just say there's a lack of government, I'm going to bring my government into this, because I might not have the authority to do it. So if I know God's heart and how I sees things, that begins to frame what I do. Then the laws of God, the decrees, bring order into situations. So I use what I receive to motivate and stimulate what I do. And ordinances of God are the directions and strategies for the manifestation, which often require things to be put in place. It requires sometimes angels to be in place. It's like, you know, in war films, sometimes you used to go into the operations room and you'd see this big map. And on this big map, there was these ships that were being moving. There were tanks being moved. There were airplane squadrons being moved, because they were called the ordnance. They were the stuff which actually got things done. And so you have laws which are based on precepts, statutes, and laws. Then it opens up something to begin to operate. You may need to move a legion of angels to do something in a particular area. That's where all this stuff becomes a bit more strategic. You know, a lot of our prayer and intercession was very much like a blunderbuss. Let's spray everything out there and hope something hits. You know, it really wasn't very targeted or very specific. It was like, but when you start to see things from heaven's perspective, they can be very specific. And you can therefore target things. It's like in the weapons room, these love bombs that are in there can be laser guided. You know, it's like, now these are symbolic of what they do with laser guided things. They get some troops to go and hide and infiltrate, and they set a laser on a target, and then the smart bomb sees the laser and it goes zoom and hits the target. It doesn't hopefully destroy everything around it because it's targeted. So we sometimes get to be the laser targeter that says, apply that love bomb to that person, to that family, to this church, to this area, to this region.
Right. When I started this journey, I was at one point with John Paul Jackson, who died.
Yeah.
And he was teaching about how not to do warfare.
Yeah.
And then he died, and that disturbed me for months because I don't understand why he's teaching on how not to do warfare, and then he died. In the middle of it.
I mean, I can't get into the specifics of certain people or not. I would say that the old guard are moving on and a new guard are coming forth. And so just because people had a prophetic gift and they were very prophetic in certain things didn't mean everything they said was right or wrong. And most of them were looking from an old perspective, not a new one. Most of them weren't operating from heaven. They had experiences, they saw things, they had some quite interesting insight, but they weren't seated in heavenly places mostly. So what they said about warfare, we need to see it from a different perspective, from heaven's perspective. Now, I agree, warfare is not what we should be doing at all. I am not going to go to war when I've already won. I'm going to actually use the verdict of victory to enforce things to change. You know, I'm going to overcome because I'm in a position where I'm seated in a position of rest. I'm not going to fight with anybody. You know, yes, sometimes you cast some demons out of people, but when you know your authority, actually even that becomes a much simpler process. You know, we don't have any histrionics in deliverance that like we used to years ago. And actually we were looking for histrionics just to see whether something was manifesting or not. You know, and actually they just played on it and caused all sorts of disruption. Actually, we see deliverance all the time, but it just happens because authority is exercised. That's why Jesus could say, without even being there, your servant is free. He didn't need to go to war. He just said the truth. I have authority, because the guy recognized his authority. I too am a man under authority. So he was operating in heaven's authority, and that authority said that person can be free. He didn't go to war. He didn't go cast any demons out. He just basically made the decree. In fact, you don't even hear what he said or what he did because he was operating in heaven in doing it. See, a lot of what Jesus did on earth was because he's already doing it in heaven, and the heavenly authority was already established because he saw what the Father was doing. You know, so when he said to Peter, Satan has desired to sift you, he didn't actually just say that to Peter. He said it to all the disciples. But was because he was seeing the accusation in the courts of heaven. Now, Jesus couldn't say, you can't do it, because they gave him a legal right, their fear. You know, because he knew that they were going to run away. He knew Peter was going to betray him. You know, he knew Peter had already decided to go fishing a few times along the journey. You know, so we tend to have this sort of rosy view of the disciples that they were all these perfect guys. When you read Peter's life story within all the Gospels, you'll see that he was called and he went back fishing. He was called and he went back fishing. And actually, at the end, he still went back fishing. It's just like, oh, Jesus is gone now. It's like, let's go back fishing. You know, yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff, you know. But we will, if we understand legislation, it will enable us to begin to exercise authority in a different way. You know, now I'm going to deal with the warfare issue the next session. So I just want to look at the laws and legislation that you use instead of warfare, because that's the authority you use rather than warfare and fighting. You know, there are some things that you do governmentally, which is like remove things from their positions, but I'm not going into a fight not knowing I'm going to win. So I might deal with a dragon or I might deal with something, but I don't go in there thinking, oh no, what's the outcome going to be? I go in there with a verdict that says victory. So to me, it's a done deal. I just use it in a sense of I am bringing this jurisdiction of my authority into this. So symbolically, your head's coming off. So you no longer have any rule. It's a symbolic thing of what you have authority to do. So I learned about legislation from wisdom. When I first started with this orb, engaging with this orb, wisdom said, I need to show you how to legislate. So she took me to the Court of Kings. I'd never been to the Court of Kings, I don't think, before that. So I go to the Court of Kings. I'm sat at a bench in the Court of Kings, and there's a scroll in front of me. And I'm there with not much clue, you know, but she's with me. And so my mind didn't know what to do, but my spirit just started to resonate with this scroll. And out of my spirit came a whole load of writing that made a law on a scroll. Now, I didn't sit there and try and figure it out. I didn't try and, what sort of law should I write? Because I didn't even know I was going to write a law. I just sat there. I was in the place of authority. Here's the scroll. And my spirit just started to come into agreement with something of the heart of God. And I released a law of fatherhood and sonship. That was the first thing I ever did. And then as I'm doing this, and I was quite surprised because it was like, where did that come from? But I sensed it was flowing from me, but I didn't have a pen and I wrote it out. It just sort of started to form in front of me. So I did that. Then once I had it and I was given the scroll, I was like, what do I do now? So wisdom took me to the Court of Chancellors. And so I went before the chancellors. There were 4 of them sat there at a bench, and I present my scroll. So they look at my scroll, read it, and they each sealed it. Lion, ox, eagle, man. There was 4 of them. So that was cool. And I noticed that there was quite a lot of activity of excitement that this was going on. I noticed that there were some cloud of witnesses. I noticed there were some angels that were quite interested in the process. And so I was a bit like, ooh, this is quite interesting. There seems to be quite a lot of activity here. But I didn't really think much more about it until I sort of started to go back there regularly. So then once I presented it, they gave it me back, sealed. So what am I supposed to do with it now? Well, wisdom took me to the Court of Scribes. So I presented the sealed scroll, and they took it and they recorded it out. They wrote it on a thing and they put it into the statute book or the records. So now heaven recognized that I was authorized to use this. And now when I said to her, say, let's an angel say to go and do something in regards to what I was authorized to do in it, they would recognize that this was part of the statutes for me, because it was recorded in heaven. And now I was then using it. So they gave it me back and I took it into my heart, you know, and then this was quite a sort of interesting process. So I then knew I was authorized to use it, but I thought, I'm sure this is not just for me. So I shared it with a bench of 3 and I said, oh, this amazing thing's happened to me the other day. Here's this scroll. And I had it recorded. So I recorded what it was. So this happened. I said, what are we going to do with it? And they said, I don't know. What are we going to do with it? So we stepped into heaven. We went to the strategy court and we got a strategy. And the strategy was we were to write it out on a scroll and we were to present it to our bench of 12. And they were to come into agreement with it. We were all to sign the scroll. And then this was something that we as a ministry, as an ecclesia, had the authority to use. And that's what we did. And so we took it to our bench of 12. We asked them to take it away, to engage God with it. And if they felt that they were going to authorize it or agree with it, then we did. So then we actually then agreed it, and we took it back into the Court of Kings and we declared it. And so that was what we did. And we didn't really know how to do any of what happened with it. So that was it. We thought, great. So Sunday comes along. I'm not there. And it was like everything broke loose. It's just like this law of father and sonship. There's men crying. There's fathers engaging people. It's just like, you know, it was good. But then we had a whole load of people, men from our therapeutic community, who all have father wounds. And all of a sudden, they can't cope with the emotion of the father coming into the room, looking to engage them. And so we discovered that although a law is given, you have to administrate how the law is used. So we discovered the law of unintended consequences. Of when you have a law, things happen if you don't know what you're doing with it. So in our therapy community, I think 2 people ran off and got drunk because they couldn't cope with the emotions that surfaced. And others, I mean, it was a bit of a learning curve, a steep one, which, because we never warned the therapy community that we were doing something highly emotional that could, because actually we didn't even know it was going to happen. But so now if we're going to do something which may be emotional, we warn them. We also put our ministry team on standby. We want to make sure that if something's happened emotionally, people can get help before they leave and go home in a distraught state. I mean, sometimes these things open up things and people can't cope. So you have to learn how to administrate a law and not just release it without thinking about the consequences of what could happen. So we learn about that way. Now, there may be laws of a nation, the bylaws of a county, a city, a state, recorded in a statute book. And that statute book is what the authorities use to actually administrate from. A statute is a formal written enactment of a legislative authority that governs a city, state, country. Typically, statutes command or prohibit something or declare policy. So we have a statute book here, which we have developed over the last couple of years. And this statute book is full of laws, full of legislation. There's probably, I don't know, 30 laws or something within that statute book that we are authorized to use. Now, most people other than me aren't really using them. I know that because I can look and see how much government there is going on, which is okay, because if people don't feel that they know how to use them, it's better they don't just go and willy-nilly try and do stuff that in reality will cause more problems than solve problems. So we will learn how to use this, and we'll learn how to apply it as we go forward. Yeah.
When you say you see how much problems going on, you're seeing in the spirit.
Yeah. Because my spirit is overshadowed this blueprint. And so I sense things. And my spirit is sensitive to that which is a lack of something that should be there. So I'm aware that things are not ordered. So as an example, we sometimes have a visiting speaker. Okay. So if we are going to have a visiting speaker, we would, for me, use legislation to provide an environment for that visiting speaker to have an open heaven, to have the angels here to engage with them, prepare the ground for him, safeguard things, put up some shields for making sure things aren't going to negatively occur. You don't just sort of, oh, great, we've got a visiting speaker, we'll see what happens when he comes. If you are responsible for his coming, you actually prepare for his coming. So we had a visiting speaker coming. So it's not my responsibility to prepare for his coming. That's the Bench of Seven's responsibility, not mine. But I was aware, because I thought I need to see if anything is going on. So I was aware that he didn't do anything to prepare for his coming. So I saw in the heavens, I went and got a mandate. I then did some things. So I called for some angels to come. I did some very specific things. I actually felt that we could have so many salvations that day, so many healings that day, and I called them all into being, preparing for his coming. So he comes and he starts giving words of knowledge of these people who are going to be healed, whatever. He starts talking about the angel that he was engaging with, because he saw this angel, which I saw and decreed and opened up for him to do. So then once we had the event, it was a positive thing. We had all these good things happen. We had a feedback session because we have a Bench of 12 meeting. And I just asked the question, what did the Bench of 7 do in preparation for his coming? And they were like, we were supposed to do something? Wasn't it a great time that we had? So I said, okay, this is what I did. And actually, this was your responsibility to do it. And you never even thought about it. Now, I wasn't coming down in a negative way. I was just saying, look, there is responsibility to legislate for the things that we do. So the next time a visiting, well, no, it wasn't a visiting speaker. The next time we were doing something, we were doing some graduations, and a lot of people were coming, parents or people, to see the graduations, but I was speaking that day. So it was like, okay, Now, I'm speaking on things that most of those people would have no clue about. So, had the bench of 7 engaged heaven and said to me, God really would want us to do something else on Sunday, so we don't really need you to speak this Sunday, I would have thought, oh, praise God, I don't have to speak Sunday. But they didn't do that. So we turn up on a Sunday, and they saw all these people coming. They're all sat there, and they suddenly think, they're not going to get what's being said. So what are we going to do? So they then say to me, well, we think we should do something else. So I'm saying, no, that operating out of fear. Actually, do you have a mandate for what we should? Did you get a mandate for anything? No. So they say, well, can you speak on something else? So I said, no, but I have already legislated for that which I'm going to speak to engage with these people, because I thought that because we had graduations, we should do something to prepare for it. Did you not think that? No. So, no, I'm used to thinking governmentally, and they're not used to thinking governmentally. So we do a review. So what I spoke about was designed to speak to them, although it spoke about a lot of other things. So I already legislated that their spirits would connect to some of the things I was going to say. So you've got to prepare. So, you know, it's a learning curve, and there's no condemnation. But the next time, this guy, the original speaker, came again. So he contacted me and said, can I come? So I said, oh, it's not my call whether you come or not. I'll pass you on to the bench of 7. So they engaged heaven, and they felt it was good to invite him. So he comes. I'm looking in the heavens, and I'm seeing there's no government.
Oh, dear.
God, can I have a mandate to do with it? No. Ah, okay. So the guy comes. He finds it's really difficult to speak. It's just like, it's not a good environment for him to speak. He struggled. He felt he struggled. I could see he was struggling. And it was just like, okay. He sort of got through it and whatever. And there were some positive things, but a lot of things I think he felt not very free. And he normally feels very free when he comes. So we do a feedback session. Who legislated for him coming? Well, I did something. Or what did you do? Well, I did this. Well, okay. So, you know, in the end, you just sort of think, okay. Now, this time, we had to learn the hard way, because we didn't learn the easy way the first time. So, but it's all a process. You know, we have to learn by, sometimes we make mistakes, sometimes we don't get, because some people will, oh, well, I was away. So, well, are you responsible while you're just here, or are you responsible? Well, I'm responsible. Therefore, being away is no excuse. It's like, you invited the guy. So you could have done something in the spirit before you went away, or while you were away. It is no distance. Well, I was thinking about other things. Well, yeah, of course you were. That's why you didn't do it. So it's okay, you know, but you do learn. And sometimes God allows you to go through the difficulties of not doing what you could have done, so that next time you'll learn. We just didn't learn. Now, the next time we'll get a visiting speaker. Well, when Carrie Browning came here, which was probably the next time we had a major thing, quite a lot of people were legislating for what was going on here. And we had an awesome time here. What they didn't legislate for was what effect that was going to cause in the atmosphere here. So we had a weekend of 2 murders. One of someone who was in one of our houses, and someone who lived in the same street as one of the guys who works here. So her coming was awesome, and we received it, and people received ministry, and it was great. But it stirred something in the atmosphere, because this was a whole new way of bringing healing and wholeness to people that actually it kicked off. So again, I saw it, but I saw it after some of the events, because I didn't see it, you know. And so then it was like, okay, what should we have done? Well, perhaps we should have looked about, is this going to have a more significant effect than just our atmosphere here? Because Our atmosphere here in the meetings was awesome. She, on the Friday that she was doing something in the evening, she was here and whatever, and we were getting ready and everything else. Our day center, which is susceptible to spiritual stuff, it was everything kicked off. You know, it was like they struggled to maintain government within it. So it was, again, okay, when we're starting to do something that can have a major effect, we got to realize that there can be some things that we have to legislate for, not just so we find positive things, but actually look at, does this have a bigger impact? Now, you know, it's not to condemn anybody or to say, well, if we'd done something, these things wouldn't have happened or not happened. But it's a sense of saying, what can we learn about how atmospheres work? What can we learn about how the enemy might react to something that we're doing? And how do we facilitate that? Because we were very good at maintaining the atmosphere here. It was an awesome atmosphere. She was totally free. Everyone received really good things, but we didn't really see the wider consequence. Yeah.
When you're saying there or you were legislating, what exactly when you're going out seeking are you doing to say I'm not?
Well, what I would do was use the authority we have in this statute book. So there are things in there that says we can do certain things. I carry this statute book in my heart, you know, because I wrote most of the stuff in there. And that which I didn't write, I took in my heart anyway, because it's for us. So I carry this. So when I look at a situation, I might look and see, okay, we need protection around what we're going to do. So I'm going to assign angels to guard and protect to make sure there's no access that the enemy has into this situation to disrupt what we're doing. Or I might say, we need to see some of these things, because this is the heart of God for what he wants to do. I'm going to call them into being. So I'm going to decree and declare and call forth that which does not yet exist as if it does, and I'm going to manifest it in heaven, so then it can be manifested on earth. So I see what it is and I call it into being. I call forth this. I call forth the angel of transformation to operate with this guy to release people to be able to be transformed in this way. So I get the heart of God. I then start to administrate what is going to happen. So that's the type of thing that you do. And depending on what the situation is, some of it can be defensive and some of it can be more offensive. And these are the things we're seeing to take place. But you do have to be vigilant and not just assume. So in what I'm doing through Freedom Apostolic Resources, and I'm on that mountain, I am responsible for what we put out, and Jeremy works within that, and therefore we put out a lot of material which people won't necessarily like. But when you look at how much material we've got out there and you look at how much negativity there has been created by it, very minimal. You know, we have well over 1 million hits on YouTube, and the negative comments that come are very few. Like I can count them on 10 fingers, because, and even those were mostly like, I have no idea what you're on about. You know, it's like one guy said, I listened to this thing. I've been a Christian for 40 years. I've been baptized in the Spirit for 40 years. Blah, 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 blah. I didn't understand a word of what you were talking about. What is this? No. But sometimes, you know, there are a few negative things and there are a few dislikes, but very minimal, because I legislate for that to be hidden from people who don't need to see it. I do not want people to see that. That's going to cause a controversy in their spirit when they're not ready to receive that revelation. So I deliberately legislate a shield which stops our media getting the attention of people who are going to create problems with it. Now, generally on our stuff, that doesn't take place. Now, I had some stuff with a guy who took exception to some of the things I was doing on Facebook. And generally, I was just reposting other people's stuff just to create an interest in thinking a different way. I wasn't particularly commenting. But he took exception and he started to try and create issues and problems, which I then had to deal with. You know, so I dealt with it spiritually first. I forgave him. I released him. I blessed him. I didn't really want to create a problem with him. But he continued. So I asked him not to do it. you know, nice and pleasantly, please don't comment on our things. I won't comment on yours. Don't do it. And in the end, he broke that. So he commented, he couldn't contain himself. And therefore he broke what he promised. And so he put some stuff up that I deleted. So I told him, I'm going to delete this because you have done what you said you weren't going to do. So, and then I actually said, okay, and I'm going to unfriend you so that you can't do this again. So I left it at that. But then I actually started to legislate for restoration, because I don't want to have people that are got a problem with me. So I started to legislate. I forgave him. I released him. I blessed him, whatever. So eventually he emailed me and said, look, I'm really sorry for what I did. Can we be friends again? So I said, well, yeah, I can reinstate you, but I would ask you to respect that you don't have to read the things we put out or the things I post. If it's going to cause you a problem, don't read them. You know, so he did, you know, and, you know, he has not subsequently done anything to do that. And he's also contacted me to say, you know, because he posted some things on his website which were trying to counteract some of the things that we posted. So he came back to me and said, I've removed those posts. But can you actually comment and dialogue with me to explain why you're saying what you're saying? And so I said, yeah, I will do that, but I'm not going to get into a debate or an argument with you, because I will look to try and help you understand. But if you don't want to understand, or you don't feel that then that's fine. You know, you're entitled to your opinion. So sometimes we have to do things to enable things to take place, to protect things, but also to permit things to take place. So this is the way I think, you know, because I'm wired by God, because I carry these statutes in my heart. They're part of me. So I look legislatively, I look governmentally, I'm looking, whenever I go somewhere, I'm looking to see what's going on in the atmosphere. Not because I'm bothered fearfully, but I want to be aware so that I can understand where the people are that I'm going to engage with, so that if I need them to help them, that I have an understanding of the situations. And sometimes I don't need to act on that. Sometimes I do. When I went to New Zealand last year, I thought, okay, I need to see what's going on in New Zealand, because I wondered why I'm even going to New Zealand. They got enough people over in New Zealand, Ian Clayton and other people, that why am I going? You know, so I thought, okay, well, I'll go. And so I thought, okay, I'll look and see what's going on in the heavens. And I thought, oh, there doesn't seem to be that much going on. So I'm flying over there. I get over to New Zealand airspace, and I see this ugly looking thing. I mean, it was the ugliest thing I've ever seen in the spiritual realm. Black, bright red eyes. I mean, it was ugly. You know, it wasn't just a dragon. It was just hideous. So I thought, and I sensed what it was doing. It was causing dissension. It was causing separation, division. So I landed, you know, spent a few days acclimatizing, doing some stuff. And we did some open meetings, and a whole load of Maori people turned up. They weren't invited, but the word got out, and they decided, rather than going to a wedding they were going to come to 2 days of teaching for me. So I shared with the lady who I was doing it with, and I said, look, what is this thing that I saw? And she said, oh, that's Tanifau. That's one of the territorial things that operate in New Zealand. And she showed me a picture. I said, that is it. That is really it. I said, well, is anyone dealing with it? She said, well, not us. So I sort of think, well, these Maori people come. So I said, look, are you aware of this thing? Yes, we've dealt with it. So then they started to get a little bit. I said, well, I still see it. In fact, I still sense it now. In fact, it's operating in this room, because you're getting annoyed because I'm saying something that you're saying you've already done. Basically, I mean, this was the gist of it. So I explained that these things operate in different levels and different realms. So I asked them what they did. And what they did was more prophetic acts on earth They never did anything in the realms of heaven, and they never did anything in the atmosphere. So I shared some revelation about what you can do and how you potentially can do it. I had no mandate to do it, and I was not going to go and tackle this thing. But I pointed out that what they were doing, in why they were annoyed with me, because I was basically coming into their territory, telling them that they had not done what they could have done, was part of the way this thing worked, to create dissension between people and between groups and people groups. And praise God, they then joined with the lady who invited me and her bench. One of the guys became part of her bench, and they dealt with it in their local area together, in agreement and in the right way. So you do have to be aware of, there is dynamics, there are things that operate, there are atmospheres, and we need to understand how we legislate and use legislation to deal with them. I did not have a mandate to deal with that. I went to Germany and I did a seminar with some people in Germany. I saw this white dragon flying around a mountain. So I was a little bit naive in those days. And so I said to the people, I see this white dragon. Do you give me authorization to deal with it for you? So they, of course, they said yes, as you would. So I went and dealt with it. Now I'm flying home on the plane, and God says to me, you're now responsible for that area of authority which you dealt with and is now empty. Because after the end of the whole thing, we went into heaven, we got scrolls released, we got government released, 4 areas in Germany, including this area where this dragon was operating. So I said, well, we released scrolls for that. He said, yeah, they might have been released, but they weren't accepted, and no one's sitting on that mountain. He says, you're responsible. I thought, well, I didn't sign up for that. So I thought, oh, okay, what do I do? So in the spirit, I went to that mountain and I sat down. I thought, well, this isn't in my mandate. But God showed me that when you do something like that, you're responsible for what you do, unless someone else takes that responsibility. And I didn't actually legislate correctly for people to be sat and do it. I just made some assumptions that they were going to do it. So I was responsible for this thing. So after a few weeks of like, okay, I need to do something else here, because I'm not going to be sat on this thing doing this every day, you know, I asked for a mandate to do something. So then I got a mandate to assign angels to that mountain until people in Germany rose up to take that place. So I met with 3 angels and I talked to them and I assigned them to the mountain, and they are now operating, and still no one is sat on that mountain in Germany. And that was in 2015, I think. So
and the angels still there.
The angels are still there, yeah. Waiting for those who are assigned to that thing from Germany to take that position.
Wow.
You know,
For years.
well, I didn't just do that. I also went to get a mandate for what can we do about this, because I was asked to go back, and I'm like, do I have a mandate to go back? No. So why? Well, because they haven't done what you shared with them the last time you went or the time before. So sharing them even more new stuff when they've not put into practice what you've done before isn't going to work. So I said, well, what do they need? God said they need inner healing, because a lot of them are still affected by the effects of the war, in which they're fearful of taking responsibility and they're waiting for others to do it. And they're still operating under the religious system that only certain people can take that level of responsibility. So I sought a mandate for sending someone else to do that ministry. And I connected up the people to friends of mine who do that sort of ministry from a heavenly perspective, so that actually they could go over and start facilitating a healing process that would break them free and bring them into a level of sonship, which then they would then take authority. So you can do a lot, you know, but you have to take it seriously. And I do, because I am aware of, what can happen if you don't. And, no, it's no way I feel it is a duty or an obligation, because I'm aware that I'm called, and I'm a son and I have governmental responsibility in various spheres that I need to work with people to facilitate and help them to do it. So literally, yes, we legislate. The laws on the statute books are what we can then use to legislate with. And if you have some situation that you don't have a statute for, then you can go and get one. Yeah.
Are you at liberty to disclose, for an example, one of your 32? And
Most of them are available on the Engaging God program.
Okay, no,
So they're open. Some of the jurisdiction is for everybody. A few of them are specifically for here, but most of them are general ones. So I will, I'll quote you one in a minute when we get there, if we get there. Where are we? Okay, I need to get on with it. So earthly religious laws are often seen as prohibitive. Heavenly laws are mainly permissive. They authorize us to act in alignment with God's will, his kingdom, to establish something. So what do you do with the law? Put it in your heart, carry it. Use the authority you give, act on it. Take it to the court of angels, get assignments. Take it to the court of wars, get strategy. Further heavenly and earthly strategies to outwork it. Administrate it. Every day I make decrees and declarations. Most of the time, my spirit's doing that all the time, when I'm conscious of doing it sometimes in specific instances, but I'm always there ruling. I'm seated there. So I'm continually governing and ruling in the areas that I have authority to do it. Sometimes I specifically do things in a conscious way, because I'm then going to have some examples to share with people who need examples. So how do you shape laws and legislation? As sons of God, we're called to rule and reign. This requires us to operate in this way, to use the authority. But if you don't know what it is, it's difficult to use it.
Exactly.
So,
that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
How do you do all this when you don't know?
well,
Where it starts from?
you learn by practicing, by engaging. And, that's why I've got all sorts of legislative modules that teach this stuff. This is why I'm doing it now. So you learn to form and shape laws. Now, I went to the Court of Kings originally. There's a law produced. I can do that because of the level of authority I carry, and I think and act that way. It's very simple for me to go and make a law. It's not as simple for other people to make a law. And when you start to do something corporately, you get a mishmash of all sorts of stuff. If you get many more than one or two people doing it together, we did one. I remember we were in a Bench of 12 meeting, and someone came, I think it was Alice. She came and said, we're part of the Harmony Mountain, and we have authorization for 3 laws. And I'm like, praise God, what are they? Well, the law of restitution, recognition, and something. I can't remember the other one was. So I said, what are they then? Oh, well, we only know the names. So immediately I was a bit like, okay, we'll go back and get the rest and come and say it. And God said, no, this is a learning opportunity. So let's step into heaven together. And let's ask God for the revelation to give us what the specifics of these laws are. 3 laws. Now, it was biting off a little bit more than we could chew, really, because 3 laws all in one go with a bunch of 12 people all engaging in different levels was a bit of a issue. So we stepped into heaven and we began to engage in this law. And so then we all came back out of heaven. We shared what we saw and what we engaged. And now we were writing it down, or one of the Bench of 3 was writing it down. And the other Bench of 3 was looking at me like, what on earth is all this stuff? Because I went into the Court of Kings and I saw, you're authorized to do this, to do this, to do this. You have permission to do this and this. Really straightforward, simple. Other people had prophetic pictures, had scriptures. There was stuff. And I'm like, how do we unpack this into a legislative thing? Because no one's going to get this. So having received all this information out of what we did when we engaged heaven, we then had to we said, we'll take this away and we'll try to make some sense of it. So we did. Next time we met as a Bench of 3, we have all this stuff that we received in this encounter. Does this make any sense to you? Well, your bit makes sense. And this bit makes sense, but this, no. Okay, what are we going to do with this? Let's step into heaven and let's get a strategy. So we stepped into heaven. Nigel, who carries a governmental legislative perspective as a ruler gift, he's doing some of the sessions tomorrow. He got this strategy, and it was like, here's 4 aspects that the law has. So then when we had these 4 aspects, we were able to take everything that was actually said and put them into one of these 4 aspects. And then everything made sense. So then we created a framework that made it easier for people who are not as familiar with laws as me to make laws and legislation. And it worked. And whatever we do now, we use this framework because it makes it nice, neat, and tidy to help people understand how to use these things. And when you get things, to realize that you may get different ways of doing it. So it isn't nice and neat and tidy when you get a lot of people involved. If you do a heavenly court case with a lot of people, it can be quite difficult. I mean, I did one with 60 people once. After 10 minutes, I was like, I wish I'd never started this. I had every agenda under the sun coming out of people's souls being manifested. Nothing to do with accusations they heard in the court, just coming out of their own brokenness or souls. But you've got to discern where something's coming from. But it's okay. You manage it. I did it corporately in the US to 150 people, a court case to deal with the Constitution of the US. It's like, oh, man. But I thought that people understood more than they did. So I handed it over to someone who operated a ministry in the courts of heaven. And we started off, and it was like within 2 minutes, I'm like, this is not a heavenly court case. A, we're not in heaven. Hey, we had all these intercessors coming up wailing. And I'm like, well, this is not what you do in a heavenly court. So I had to rescue the situation. So I had to go to the guy. It's just being live streamed. So I had to quickly go to him and say, look, don't think this is really what I was intending. Let me take over. So I went back and said, look, this isn't just a new way of praying. This room isn't the courtroom. You don't need intercessors here. This is what you do. We're going to step into heaven. We're going to stand in identification with the US and its judicial process and the statutes. We're going to ask for accusations. When you hear the accusations, you're going to deal with them by agreeing with them, accepting them, and receiving a freedom from it. No one is going to tell anyone else what they're doing. Can you imagine 150 people all telling you what they're seeing? But I'm going to trust that enough of you know what I didn't say this, but this is what I was thinking. I'm going to trust that enough of you know what you're doing, that we're going to have at least some positive things that are going to come out of this. And the rest of you hopefully will learn. That's what I thought. So we did it, and then gave some time for them to deal with the accusations. I dealt with some. We got a verdict. Now we have this verdict. Now, and then it was like we had declarations that came with the verdict. Everything sort of worked out. But, you know, when you do things corporately, it can be messy. And you've got to, anyone who's facilitating it has got to learn to handle the mess, or do it in a way that doesn't allow the mess to be seen. You know, which is why when we do court cases here corporately, we don't do them and everyone starts talking about what they're seeing in heaven. And when we do engagements in heaven, we don't talk about what's happening while we're having it, because all that does is distract people. And actually, when I say something, people will be oh, I need to see that. Because if you don't say it, you see what you need to see. When someone who's a forceful personality and character says something, other people can think they're seeing wrong because they don't see what that person's seeing. So we found it was much easier for all to engage, all to step out of that engagement, all to share what it was, whether it be a court case or whatever, agree what we agreed together, and then step back in and deal with it, rather than going on this sort of journey that everyone's trying to follow what everyone else is doing. It just made it much easier and simpler. Now, I know there are other ways of doing it, and if you do it another way, that's fine. But we didn't find that worked here. So that's what we do. So what we did is we got these 4 things. Okay, So here's the fourth thing. Here's the framework. The context of the law. What is this law referring to? The authority, the rights and powers the law gives. So here's 4 sections of making a law from heaven or a piece of legislation. The jurisdiction that that law has, the consequences and the result that that law is going to bring. So then we were able to put this together so people could see, I had this scripture. Oh, that fitted into the context of the law. I had these series of declarations. That was the consequence of what you did in using the law. I have this series that says you are forgiven. You can do this, you can do this, you can do this. So the context, this should form a clear explanation of what the law is for. If you don't know what the law is for, how are you going to use it? The background to the law. It's being written. It can contain all the supporting information relevant to the law being drawn up. The following are examples of what can be included. Scriptural references, information from the blueprint, other reasons the law is needed that God revealed or you have seen in the heavenly realms. And you have the authority, the rights, the powers. In essence, what the law enables you to do. It's quite clear, often with statements like you're authorized to, you're empowered to, you have the right to. Authority, this is where God gives you the specific explanation of what you're being authorized to do. It expresses the permission to use the law. There may be many different varied things that the law authorizes you or situations that you can use it in that get revealed that you put into that section. The rights, these are the privileges, the entitlements that God gives to operate the law. The rights come from your identity and your position. Individual rights or corporate rights. Sometimes the law only applies to a situation. You can't apply it everywhere. Sometimes it's used as a part of a bench that can use this, do this together. All this comes as you learn to make laws. This could include the rights to make declarations or proclamations, the right to acknowledge, to be acknowledged in heaven and on earth as having this authority, the right to enforce the law and uphold others accountable for what you're doing. There's lots of things that could be part of a law. Powers, these are the governmental in nature. You may have the authority, but you need the power to use it. Just because someone says you can stop the traffic, if you didn't have a policeman's unit on, you might get run over because people might ignore you. So the power to do it comes with the authority, and you need to exercise the power. Therefore, you need to know your authority to do that. You may have a court order or a verdict that you have to then use the ability to use. That may include abilities, healing, manipulation of matter, functions, judicial, priestly, kingly, skills, competencies, aptitudes, know-how, expertise, faculties, senses, gifts. All these things are powers that enable you to do it, and some of those will give you specific direction. And then jurisdiction, simply to who or what this law applies. Does it apply to our ecclesia here? Yes. Does it apply to the Joshua generation, a whole, all over the world, anywhere? Yes, if that's what the law is. Make sure you know what your jurisdiction is. Because if the jurisdiction is for the cosmos, that's great. Use it anywhere. If it's for Barnstable, then you don't want to use it outside of Barnstable or Toronto or Sydney or wherever you might have a law in a specific sense. So all the law applies to something. It has specific government over territories, realms, dimensions, people, places, things, depending on what it is. So the laws that God gives are governmental, therefore they give you the authority for dominion, the right to rule over a specific area of responsibility. This is not to control things, but to release blessing, freedom, harmony, health. Now, those are our mountains. We have 7 mountains. Some of them are blessing, freedom, harmony, and health. So we can use those within our spheres of authority. We can use them to help people find and fulfill their destiny because we have a mandate to do that. But just because you have a heart for something or compassion for someone does not mean you automatically have jurisdiction. Don't jump into something that you do not know what you're doing, that you're not clear that you have the right to do it. Don't step outside of the spheres of influence or specific mandates. So that might be Barnstable, Devon, England, the UK, the world. Just because you live somewhere doesn't necessarily authorize you. And just because you don't live somewhere doesn't mean you don't have authorization. I know people who are in the States who are doing stuff in Japan, spiritually in the heavens. You know, I know when the guys in Toronto meet quite often, they get things for other places. Because that's part of the fact that God is authorizing you to do this. This not because something is authorized because you live there or you don't live there. You know, I know someone who's very jurisdiction. She has a great authority. She went in to live in a new place and they said, well, you haven't got any right to do anything here. God sent her there. She had every right to do that, but they didn't recognize her right, but God did. You have to carry something in your heart if you're going to use it. That's really, really important. So this could be for a people group or for Christians or for various things, for places, for territory. I carry in my heart that which I use. Therefore, God recognizes, and therefore that authority that I carry is effective. If you just have a law and you're just parrot fashion using it and you don't have any investment into it in your heart, you carry very little government towards it. There may be spiritual places, dimensions, things in heaven that you have authority that a law gives. Satan's trophy room, different things. There may be spiritual beings that this law gives you access to engage with. Resources, money, crops, water, power sources that you may have authorization to get using a law. The consequences or the results of the law. This is what happens when the law is used. What happens when the law is opposed or broken? When someone challenges your authority in the realms of heaven or in the spiritual realm. What are you going to do then? Cry? Go to God saying, oh, they didn't respect my authority. No, you get a mandate to deal with it. Because just because you've expressed something doesn't mean that things are just going to toe the line. Sometimes because someone uses the authority against the law, it shows you that there's something legally which they have that this law needs to address. So you go to the court, you find out what that legal accusation is, then you deal with it, then you go back, and they don't have the right to resist what you're doing. So expectations that manifest blessing, there is contempt of court. You do a court case, you get a verdict, they don't affect the verdict, and they don't have a legal right to do it. They're just testing whether you know your authority. Take them back to get court. The judge does not like when his verdicts are being challenged. It's called contempt of court, and you can be imprisoned for contempt of court with no trial, and they can keep you there as long as they want. So when you threaten a contempt of court to the demonic realm or to angelic beings, false demons, whatever you want to call them, dragons, this sort of stuff, the accusers that you call to the court, and you say, I'm going to do a contempt of court, they know they can be imprisoned. This is when Jesus was casting out the demons from the Gadarene demoniac. What happened? They said, no, don't send us to the abyss. Let us go into those pigs. So they knew that they could be sent to a place that they could not get out of. So if you know your authority, use it and bring them back into the court and actually call for the judge to deal with them, because he will. Then from that point you then have authority, and they know that they're on dodgy ground if they start continuing to do what they're doing.
Do you need a mandate to take a French sort of accusation? You need a mandate.
You need a mandate. You need a mandate for everything. It might be implicit within your spheres of government. So I could take my children to the court. The level of authority I have in that is less than the level of authority I have in my own life, because it's dependent on their engaging or not engaging. Therefore, I can do some things that helps them engage, but I can't force them. You can't use the court as a control system over people. You're there to bless them. So if someone gives you authority, let's say someone is struggling and you say, can I help you? And they say, yes, I give you authority. And you say, well, I want to go to the court. And they say, yes, you can do that on my behalf. That gives you more authority than if you just do it, because it's generally part of, like, someone in the ecclesia here, because of my role within that, I had authority to bless them. And therefore we could do things corporately as a bench in the court. And we did. And I remember we dealt with a difficult court case with someone who was in hospital in a very serious state and they could die. And as a bench of 12, we felt we had a responsibility and authority to do it. And we went into heaven. We got pages of accusations. This person was actually in intensive care. They were really like, it was a life-threatening thing. We did the court case. We took the verdict. I went in the spirit realm into their room in the ICU, and I actually used the verdict and rebuked the spirit of death and commanded it to leave. And the next day we sent people from our healing mountain, our health mountain, to go and engage physically. Within 5 days, she was home, you know, and which was great. But then all those accusations, which we dealt with on her behalf because she was unable to, she's now responsible for making sure she doesn't go back and do the same things again and reactivate and give permission for that stuff to happen again. Well, actually, the lady didn't really like that. She was like, she didn't want to own all these accusations because I think she was insecure and felt, if I agree with all these things, well, we already knew the accusations, so it was all in her head. But unfortunately, she couldn't cope with that. Sadly, she ended up she's in a motor scooter now. You know, basically can't walk properly. Sadly. So when we do these things, it will include the expected results, the effects, the outcomes, such as what we do as a result, making declarations, decrees, creative statements, assigning angels, releasing sounds, discernment, judgments, justice, blessing, freedoms, favor, peace, multiplication, salvations. There's all sorts of results, things, restoration, miracles, fill in the blanks. Because whatever you do will have certain results that are designed when you have legislation. Also, it may detail any consequence of non-compliance, like a 7-fold return for things you've been stolen, which is a biblical principle. You can get principles like that. The return of curses spoken to those who speak them, removal of rights from those in opposition, the loss of favor and blessing, the authority to use the courts of heaven to enforce the law. All these things can be at work. Now, I've gone through the law of unintended consequences. Be careful how you use a law and prepare in advance for what the results might be. Don't leave it to, oh, great, we're going to release this law and this mayhem happens, because you've not legislated and you've not prepared. You've not communicated with who those might affect. It's like me making a law that I'm going to release for Sunday. I don't tell anyone I'm going to do it. I didn't tell our bench, I don't do this, but if I did, I didn't tell the bench of 7. So they turn up on Sunday, and this law opens this thing up that they're not prepared for. They haven't done any ministry to prepare for it. They weren't aware of it. That could cause disruption. It could cause problems. Communicate with those you need to communicate when you're doing it. So God spoke to me about giving him time to legislate, to make and enact laws. This was a very specific thing in 2016, in January 2016. He said, I want you to take time each day to legislate and make laws. So I said, okay.
Wow.
Now, I'd been using the existing legislation we had at that point in time to administer the kingdom. I was doing a lot of things. So I assumed this was more of the same. So I was then to go and make new legislation using the authority to release things. So what am I supposed to do? Well, this is what he said. Son, legislate the area, the region, the nations for justice and call for freedom. Oh, great. So I call you to administrate my heart from my people's freedom from religious oppression. This is what, now, that was my mandate. So it's like, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to use that mandate? What laws were I supposed to make? Well, I didn't know. So I went to wisdom. I engaged her. She took me to the court of the councils of the fathers. I engaged the 24 elders around Father, Son, and Spirit, and they gave me some specific things, assignments, and some general advice as well, which was very helpful. So now what was on my heart was engaging from the Father, because he'd given me this heart. I began to make a specific law, a mandate for the law of religious freedom. So I went to the Court of Kings. I sat at the bench. I called for a scroll. And out of my spirit, things started to write on the scroll. I followed the process. It came directly from God, but I went there and engaged with his heart. So I hereby authorize the law of religious freedom. The law approves the right of the Joshua generation to set my people free. You're authorized to bring freedom to the oppressed, to release light into the shrouded darkness of the old Moses order, You're authorized to administer Emmaus Road-like encounters to those whose minds have been veiled by the coverings of men. You're authorized to call for and administrate justice for God's people. You're in love. You're empowered to challenge the old winesets and their associated mindset. Old wineskin. The old Moses order. Mountains can be shaken with the winds of change, which is an angelic order. You're authorized to call the Joshua generation to action, to cry into the valley of decision, to release the heavens, sound, and light. You've been assigned the ordinances of the angelic host to engage in visitations, dreams, and visions. Pretty powerful law. So I took the law to the chancellor's court. I got it agreed. It was authorized and sealed. I went to the scribes. It was written into the statutes. I'm empowered to legislate that. So what do? I legislate. So what did I do? I went, I stood on my mountain. This law was in me, and I let my spirit release declarations. So on the basis of the law of religious freedom, I call for the veils to be removed from those covered by the resistors and rejectors of the new heavenly order. Now, I didn't figure this out. I just said it, and I recorded what I said. So I didn't sit down on the basis of the law and try and make some declarations up. I went to my mountain, this law is in me, and I just started to decree. I call for justice on the basis of God's judgment, exposing those refusing to take the people into the promised inheritance. I call for the stirring and quickening of the hearts of those who have been covered and limited. I call for a new generation to arise. I call for mercy and the light of truth to shine brighter and with more intensity into the darkness of the coverings of men. I call for justice and freedom from the religious evangelical spirit that is plaguing God's people. So I'm on the offensive here. You know, I'm not just, oh, wouldn't it be nice if we saw people set free? It's like I am authorized to make some very serious declarations, and I use these declarations and make new ones all the time on the basis of this, because this still needs to function. I call for a holy dissatisfaction to grow in the hearts of God's people, and the cry to go out from deep within, there must be more than this.
You just changed the whole history of mankind right now with this.
Yeah, that's what laws do. Now, whether people respond to this is whether I'm going to continue to enforce this and continue to administrate this, which I do all the time. I'm calling for the Joshua generation to come out of the wilderness all the time. I'm releasing sounds. I'm releasing light. I'm sending out angels. I'm sending angels to visit people in dreams. I mean, I'm serious about this. This authorization was the heart of the Father. I call for the sound of heaven to resonate in the hearts of those who will become hungry for more when they become dissatisfied with the junk food and baby food they're being fed. Now, I'm sort of, you know, pretty challenged by what I saw. I call for more angelic encounters, visitations, dreams, visions, and supernatural engagements. I call for a new desire to rise in the hearts of those who've been misled and covered by religious veils of doctrine and theology that deny the supernatural as normal to our lives. I call for an open heaven environment. I call for the revelation and releasing of heavenly mandates and blueprints. I call for God's will and God's kingdom to be revealed and released. I call for the government of heaven to be established on earth as it is in heaven. You know, this is serious. But this is a law that all of you can use. If you get a mandate from God to use it, don't just assume, but ask him. You can actually take this. Don't use my declarations. Use the law, place it in your heart and make your own. Because these are my declarations that come out of who I am. I call for the facilitation of heavenly perspectives. I call for a release of heavenly, national, regional, area, local, and personal mandates to be released. I call for all who are seated in their heavenly places of rest and authority. I call for God's kingdom to be manifested on earth as it is in heaven. Now, you can respond to that call because it's calling people to come into a new revelation of who they are as children of God. So,
Maybe that which brought us here today.
Hmm?
And what is bringing us here now?
Well, some of that is why you're here, yeah, because that resonates out there in the atmosphere. I've also released blue lights. I've released sounds. I've done lots of other things to help connect with people around the world who's there. They know God is calling them to something. They probably just don't know quite what it is. I want to help them find out. which is why we want to help you find what your mandates and blueprints are and what you're called to do, what your destiny is, what your inheritance is, so you can facilitate it. So you can do all these things that I've been doing. Just do them within the area that you've been mandated to do it. Start with your own life. Start making legislation that enables you to fulfill your own mandates. And you use it regularly. And then live in that realm that you've created, which is for the manifestation of that which God has called you to. That's how you start to use laws and legislation and begin to demonstrate it on earth as it is in heaven. Okay, well, let's take a 10-minute break. And then we're going to do the last session, which is about heavenly authority rather than spiritual warfare.
Oh, yes. I think I want to visit our weapons room, you know. Yeah, I love it. Please,
I don't,